All right, welcome back everybody to the second week of the Tech Bytes web development course, or if you're here from way early in June, for the 10th week of the JavaScript session. We have come a long way, and with school starting now, we will be diving deeper, and yeah, so without any further ado, let's get back into the web development course. In case you don't already know me from the past session, my name is Rayhan Siddiqui. I'm a rising senior at James B. Cohen High School. I love to program and code. I've made various different projects, whether it be apps for the App Store, different websites, and now I love to really express myself through other content on YouTube and writing articles. If you want to learn more about me, as always, my website at rayhansiddiqui.com. All right. So if you have not already joined the Google Classroom, I believe there are a couple of people who have not already joined. Be sure to join the Google Classroom, because not only for the web development course, but also for the intro to programming course, that is where I post all the weekly recaps along with the YouTube link and snippets of the code, which we go over every day. So in case you get lost, you type something incorrectly, you can always pull up my fresh copy with the right answer and the right example to clarify any misconceptions. And yeah, and also on the Google Classroom, it's a great way to ask any questions you might have. So here is the code. I will drop in the chat once more. Hopefully you should be in so that we can get rolling. All right, there it is. So if you have not already joined, be sure to do so. Also, since there are a couple of new names, looks like, and a new participants, which is always welcome. We always like to grow our Tech Bytes programs. Be sure to check out our old session videos in case you're ever confused as to maybe a term I'm going over. Maybe I'm talking about a for loop potentially, and you're like, what is a for loop? If you want, you could obviously ask me right away in the chat, and I can quickly go over that as well. But if you'd like to see a more detailed version, back then when Andrew and I used to do this together, you can check out our detailed explanations and go through our weekly videos on the Schaumburg Library's YouTube channel. And all of our old sessions can be found under the JavaScript videos in the Tech Bytes playlist. All right, so let's get down to today's agenda. Firstly, we're going to start off a new tradition in our web development course, along with in our intro to programming course. And that new tradition is going to be called the fun daily fact of the day, or the week technically. And that's going to be, we're going to be talking about a fun fact which relates to the programming language we're studying and going over. So with this web development course, we're going to go over a fun fact every week relating JavaScript to something in a real world example. And something, a fun fact today is really something which happened pretty recently. And secondly, we're going to learn about Booleans in the JavaScript language. In case you're here from the Intro to Programming course, you might remember we talked about Booleans in Python. Well, it's time to replicate those skills in JavaScript. And then we're going to learn a couple more new terms, get ourselves used to those. And then it's time to get back on that game development grind. And then we'll get started with that and look at what we're going to do in the future. All right, so let's get started off with the first ever Tech Bytes cool JavaScript fact of the day, that being the company SpaceX used the language of JavaScript, which we're learning about through these web development and JavaScript courses, during their recent Endeavor mission. Now, if you don't know what the Endeavor mission was, SpaceX is a company who was recently employed by the United States government, aka by the federal spaceship program called NASA, to create a spaceship essentially to start sending humans back to the moon. Now, it's been a while since we've had boots on the moon. It's been almost been more than a decade now since we've had people on the moon. So we're trying to the United States is trying to send more and more people back there. And SpaceX was the company who was in charge of creating that spaceship. And you may or may not have heard in the news a couple of days ago when astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, they recently splashed down from the International Space Station, coming back after almost 2.5 months. They were doing some research up there, and they went in this spaceship which SpaceX developed. Now, where does JavaScript come into all of this? Well, the spaceship which was used, which was the first spaceship to splash down, fun fact, over 25 years, this spaceship used JavaScript as the main interface. So if you did not get a chance to see, I'll pull up a picture maybe next week or maybe even right now at the end of the session if you have some time, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley inside the spaceship, there were many tablets or like computer screens and LCD screens. Well, the interface and how those screens were able to run and communicate with other systems inside the spaceship was through the programming language of JavaScript. Now, this was something which was very controversial because so you'll learn as you progress in your programming careers that JavaScript is a language which is not usually used in this big capacity. Well, SpaceX and the CEO, you might have heard of, Elon Musk, they're always ready to take new risks and show that they're going to be the pioneers in areas. And they used JavaScript to power the whole screen and make it accessible for the astronauts. So that was something that's pretty cool, and always nice to know that these programming languages which we're learning every week about, whether it be JavaScript, Python, or any other programming language, you name it, they're always being used in our daily lives, and they have a pretty close impact. And this impact which we saw was on a pretty big national level, and hopefully this will help us in getting back to the moon. All right, so with that fun fact out of the way, let's dive deep into our first typing code example for the day in JavaScript, that being really talking about Booleans. Now, we did talk about Booleans and what they do in our Intro to Programming course. Essentially, what they do is that they can hold two values, that being either true or false, sort of like binary. They're either on or off, 0 or 1. Well, in this case, Booleans are either true or false, and we often use them in computer programming while using a while loop to see if a condition is met. And often we use them even more frequently during with De Morgan's law, which we'll talk about in a bit. So the syntax for creating a Boolean variable is as follows. Since this is JavaScript, we simply cannot type out the name of the Boolean variable. We have to first type out var and then the name of our Boolean variable, and then we set it equal to either true or false. Now, notice a quick little minuscule detail in JavaScript. The words true and false are written with the lowercase letters of T and F. And you might remember, if you're here from the Intro to Programming course, that in Python, true and false are written with a capital T and F. Just a little syntax there, so I haven't confused this, so nothing too big, but just let me know that you write them differently. But the concept at the end of the day is still the same. So regardless of, we're always talking about comparing Python and JavaScript because we have a nice audience who's doing both, and it's nice to do such to see how different languages relate. The concept is always, well, usually always the same, but the only thing which may differ is just the syntax and how you write stuff out. So at the end of the day, regardless of however we're writing Booleans, there's still a variable which holds either a true or false value. Now, let's learn about how we can manipulate these Boolean variables in something called De Morgan's law. So we learned about last week in the Intro to Programming course, or this past Monday, about how we can manipulate Boolean variables, and manipulation is a large, very large way of how we use Boolean variables in checking if multiple conditions are true. So if you remember how we inverted a variable to a false, say if a Boolean variable was initially true, we want to make it a false, we simply add that exclamation mark in front of the Boolean variable. But let's talk about the differences which are prevalent when we're trying to see if two Boolean variables have the same value, or trying to see if one has a value of true or false. So you might remember in Python, we simply type out the word and when checking with Boolean manipulation, seeing if two Boolean variables are either both true, both false, whatever the case might be. Well, in JavaScript, we use two and signs, or I believe they're called ampersand signs. So it should be, the command on your keyboard should be Shift-7. So we need two, so double two and signs, and that is how we replicate the word and from Python. And then the or statement, we simply use two, I don't actually know what these, this symbol is called. They're two straight lines. They're shift by the shift backslash. So once you hit those, you need two of those as well. And they take care of the or, which we're used to in Python. So that's a quick refresher why we would use these manipulators with Booleans. They're especially useful if we're checking if multiple conditions are true. Then we can run and execute a specific code segment And then remember, a key fact about De Morgan's law and how we can manipulate Boolean variables is that if we're using the double and, regardless of whether we're doing Python or JavaScript, both of the variables conditions must be met. So in this case, if we look to our right, we see that first var and second var. Now, can anybody tell me what this statement means? If you're from our Intro to Programming course or last week's web development course, what is this a shorthand for? How is this saving me time? So can anybody have any guesses, or can anybody remember what is this first line statement saying? All right, that's fine. All right, yeah, sure. So remember, if we are simply just writing our Boolean variable in like this, say in an if statement, this is implying that we're checking if the value of our Boolean is true. So in this case, by me simply just writing if first var and second var, I am telling the computer that if the first var variable has a value of true and the second var variable of Boolean variable has a value of true, then please alert in the window this statement which says both true. Now, if I were to use these straight lines, use an or statement, then say if you were still doing the same if statement, if I was doing if first var and or second var, then I would still be alerted with both true, because remember, in an or statement, we're checking for one true Boolean value. So in this case, that would work. And say second var was false. We'll get into typing all this obviously in a little bit, but just to clarify, if second var was true, false, I mean, and you were using the or statement, then you would still be alerted with both true, because one of our values contains a true value, that being first var. So although this might be a bit confusing, guys, we'll be for sure tackle this in our coding example today when we hop on our website. All right, so we have learned some new topics today, some new terms, that being Booleans and how to manipulate those Booleans. And we've learned about parameters in the past week with the start of our web development course. But we've learned a lot of new topics, and I think it's time for us to have some fun again. And we've made obviously a lot of games in our JavaScript course back then in the summer months of June and July. How about we start making some games again and start applying our skills? So firstly, we're going to go over some Boolean syntax, do all that, and then with the second, in a couple minutes, we'll then start making a new game of Jeopardy. Now, this basic idea, if you have not watched Jeopardy, is that you click in a computer instance, you click a button, you get asked a question, and then if you respond correctly to that question, then you receive some type of money amount. So say $500, $600, and then we want to keep track of the amount of money the user has. So then essentially the idea is that we'll have multiple buttons with dollar amounts. When the user or we click the button, we should be prompted with a question. And then we want to use the document object model to show the user's points. So to manipulate and show how many points the user has. And also we will be combining our ideas of arrays, which we learned I believe 3 weeks ago. So we can get a nice refresher on that as well. But this will be, since this is obviously a really big game, we're going to be taking our time and going slowly, making sure that we understand everything behind the game. So this will be a multi-week project. So we're first going to go over the new terms today, start our Jeopardy game, and then we will pick off where we leave off today next week as well. So without any further ado, let's apply those new terms and start making that Jeopardy. So if everybody can hop on our new website, that being jsfiddle.net, I will drop the link in the chat as well. And if you could please let me know once you're on, and we can get started. And as you guys are logging on, I always highly recommend that you make a JS Fiddle account. No, this is not a sponsored video by JS Fiddle, but I think it's highly useful that if you're trying to go back and check your old pieces of code, it's extremely useful in the sense that you can name your project and just save it. And if you head on over to your Fiddles, you can see all your past projects. So it's really useful. If you have ever a question, as always, I'm here to answer. So please let me know once you're in, and we'll get started, guys. All right, so how about we start off by first just familiarizing ourselves with the Boolean syntax and how to write it out. So I'm going to create a button in the HTML, which is where we structure our website, remember? So let's see if we can remember how to do that. So remember, it's button, and then we usually have an onClick, which is the function, which we're going to call once the button is clicked. I'll just call this, I'm going to call my function Boolean function. And then the closing greater than or equal to sign. And then simply just name our button. I'm going to call, I'll just say click for Boolean, like that. Now, once we have a button which will execute a function, we have to type that function out. So how about we hop on over to our JavaScript section and then start typing a function. Remember, this is not Python, so we do not do def for functions. Instead, we literally type out the word function. And then since whatever you called, oh, I forgot the open and close parentheses in the onClick, so be sure to remember those. And then whatever you called your function in the onClick, just copy and paste that below, whatever you named it, as the open and closed parentheses, along with the open and closed curly brackets. And this is where we'll store our code. Give everybody a quick moment to catch up. If always, guys, if you ever feel like I'm going too fast, ever have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. All right, so how about we type out our first Boolean variable? So remember, since it's JavaScript, we do var. I'm going to call it first Boolean, and then we set it equal to either true or false. So in this case, I'm going to say my first Boolean var is going to be positive, and we'll say true. Like such. Now, if we want to check what the value of our Boolean variable is, we can simply alert it, or even better, we can just do a console.log and log whatever the value of our first Boolean is, the variable. So if I hit this button, there we go. We see our log is updated with the value of true. All right, so now that we have typed out our first Boolean variable, how about we get into De Morgan's law and how we can manipulate our variable? So how about we start off with a basic example first, that being the inverse. So you might remember from a couple slides ago that we can change the value of our Boolean variable by just using an exclamation mark. So instead of me having to literally go first Boolean equals false, instead of having to type this whole line of code out, we got a very simple way. How can we do that? Well, so say we want to alert the value of the opposite of our Boolean variable, we can simply put an exclamation mark, which is shift number 1, and then type the name of our Boolean variable like this. And if we hit run, and I hit click the button, we see that false is alerted. That is because whenever we use the exclamation mark, this inverts our Boolean. And I'm going to quickly name my fiddle so that I can, for later purposes, guys. Give me a quick second. All right. So that's a quick, nice shortcut to know. and we can see that we can inverse the value of our Boolean like that. So I'm just going to comment this line of code out and go below. How about we create a second Boolean variable so that we can see how to manipulate and check for specific conditions. So basic syntax, we type out var, second Boolean, or whatever you would like to call your second Boolean variable. And I'm going to set this one equal to false. Now, I want to run a, say I want to run a specific, say I want to alert to the user you're in, or whatever the case might be, run a certain piece of code after checking for specific conditions of the first and second Boolean variables. So I'm going to hit enter, just clear some space. And how about we use an if statement? So if, open and close parentheses. How about we use the and operator? So we'll do first Boolean. Now remember, if I simply leave my Boolean like this, that is implying to the computer that I'm checking for if the first Boolean variable value is true. So I don't have to type out all this code. That's a nice shortcut to know. And then how about we do the and sign? So double and, because remember that's the equivalent of the word and in Python. And then we'll do our second Boolean variable. So remember, what this piece of code is telling us is that if the value of our first Boolean variable is true, and this value of my second Boolean variable is true, then run whatever piece of code is inside of here. So how about we add an alert to the user, and we'll say inside here, just to visualize and see how our code runs. So if I hit run, click for Boolean, can anybody make a guess or a prediction as to will this statement be alerted based off the values of our Booleans? So will this alert be prompted to us based off these values of our Boolean variables? Does anybody have a prediction? All right, yep. So this line of code will not run because this condition is not going to be met in the sense that the first Boolean variable value is true. So that's good. However, since we're using the and operator in the sense that we're checking for both conditions being true, the second Boolean variable has a value of false. So this line should not run. And if we hit our button, we see that nothing is being prompted. However, how about we want to check if the value of our first Boolean variable is true, but the second one is false? How can we do that? Well, simply add the exclamation mark in front. And now if I run this piece of code, we should see the statement being alerted to us like such. All right, so now say we wanted to not check for an inverse value of our Boolean variable, but we just wanted to see if one of the two Boolean variables had a value of true. How can we do that? Well, remember, we can use the OR operator. Well, we can't type it out because this is in Python, but we can do shift and then the backslash like such. This is equivalent to OR. And now if I run this piece of code, we will see the alert being made because one of these two Boolean variables has a value of true, that being the first Boolean variable. Alrighty, so this was a basic exercise I wanted to do with Boolean variables, but if there are no further questions for today, with the next couple of minutes and let's say the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes, we can get started by getting started on our Jeopardy project. So give me one quick second. I'm going to save my Fiddle, and then I'm going to open a new blank screen. in 1 second. All right, here we go. So I'm just going to name my fiddle, call it Jeopardy. All right. Give you guys a quick second. I would highly recommend that you create a separate fiddle so that you can have 2 separate projects. And once everybody is ready to go, please drop in the chat and we'll get started. All right, so how about for today's session, we create the basic structure of our Jeopardy game. So today we're not going to dive deep into the whole concept of going back into our arrays, storing our questions and answers, and using for loops and all of that awesome stuff. But for today, how about we just create a basic board for our Jeopardy game so that next week when we get back on, we are ready to go and then we can start programming our JavaScript. So let's think about how Jeopardy looks like, and how about I even pull up a quick picture of a Jeopardy board so that we can have a nice visualization. So if you have not watched Jeopardy, it's a great show hosted by the great Alex Trebek, but this is how the board looks like. There are multiple values of dollar amounts. There's usually a category to which those questions pertain to. And then basically the contestant, they say self-portrait of the artist, 1,600. And then they're asked a question, which is worth the $1,600, a lot of money. We're just dealing with virtual money here today. And then if you get it right, that money's added on to you. If you get it wrong, then that is subtracted from you. All right, so we have the basic structure, the basic image in our mind. So how about we get started by making it? So for today, we're not going to do much CSS. We could, that could be definitely an extension to make our project look nicer. But for today, how about we make a bunch of buttons so that we can start creating our categories. So let's make our first button. Remember, it's less than sign and then button. I'm not going to give it an on-click value for a function because we don't know what we're going to be doing with that. And then we can simply do the greater than or equal to sign. And then I'm just going to call this the first question we can make worth, how about $100? Give me 1 second. All right, so now that we have our first value of $100, how about we make some more buttons for different values? So what we can simply do is just copy and paste that button, and I'll do $200, or we'll do $250. We'll do 500, and then we'll do the last question being worth $1,000. Now, you may or may not notice that, oh, wait 1 second. This is in a row. Isn't Jeopardy usually going down in columns? Well, we can for sure do that. So how about we simply can, just duplicate the values of the dollar amount. So we can do $100, $100, $100. So this signifies that the first row of questions will be worth $100, like such. And then what we can simply do is just copy and paste all of these buttons, add a nice simple indent so that we know where we're working from. That's a lot of hundreds, 1, 2, 3, 4 from here. And then we can make our next value for the next row be worth $250. Like such. Now you may notice that once you've changed the values that they're still in one row. Well, how can we fix that? Well, we can simply use something called a break. So how we write that out is you less than sign, BR, and then greater than sign. This way, we can evenly space it out, space out the buttons like such. Now, I want you to get started on creating the next row of buttons, that being the $500 buttons. There we go. And then the last row will be of the $1,000 buttons. There we go. All right. So this is the basic structure of how our Jeopardy game will be working. Now we can really make this look a bit nicer, and I believe I will do that. So in the template, in the Google Classroom, in case you did not had difficulty following along, made a mistake potentially, I will drop the link to this Fiddle, and I will add some colors and make it a bit look nicer as an extension. And then next week, we shall get started on the actual coding behind the whole concept of what happens when we click the buttons and asking questions with arrays and all that great stuff. All right, so for next week, guys, we will keep on continuing working on our Jeopardy project. Currently, I believe that we should be able to finish it next week. However, if not, that is totally fine. We can work on it even further if you guys have any questions. And then after we finish our Jeopardy project, we will be working on a new project, that being a calculator. So hopefully you guys had a great time today, learned about the differences between Python and JavaScript in terms of Boolean variables and how we can manipulate them with De Morgan's law. And hopefully you learned something new, especially with the fun fact of the day, which we started this week. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you guys on the Intro to Programming course. But if not, I'll see you next Wednesday in the Web Development course. See you guys.